My name is Sierra Martinez, and I am the Senior Manager of Digital Marketing and Innovation here with Blue Star Families. I'm honored to be here with you all today, and I am so grateful to be joined by Mrs. Nancy Ruttenberg from Naval Services FamilyLine and from Miss Kate Horrell, an accredited financial counselor. Nancy, would you like to say hello?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Again, my name is Nancy Ruttenberg. I'm the chairman of Naval Service FamilyLine, and we are thrilled to be partnering with Blue Star Families in this very timely and important webinar on college resources. Being the mother of two college graduates, I understand how important this topic is, how timely, and we can't thank Kate enough for offering all of her sage advice and wisdom. So thank you so much to Blue Star Families and to Kate.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you all for joining us today. Whether you're calling in from your home or from work, we're so grateful that you're here. We understand, as military spouses ourselves, that the government shutdown happening right now is difficult for everybody. But please know that you are not alone and that we are working diligently to compile resources to support you during this time. I encourage you to use the live chat feature today to submit any questions you have. We will allow about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for a Q&A, and any questions that we're not able to answer during that time, we will get to within the Blue Star neighborhood afterward. I just want to say one quick reminder about PII. Please refrain from sharing any personal identifying information in the chat when asking your questions. Keep them general and adhere to our community guidelines. With that, I'm so excited to get started. Kate, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sierra and Nancy, for giving me this opportunity. It's my mission to get the information out there however I can do it, and Blue Star Families is a great partner in reaching as many people as possible. So as Sierra said, I'm an accredited financial counselor, a chartered financial consultant, and a military qualified financial planner. But most importantly, my husband is a retired sailor. He served for 30 years, and we've put 4 kids through college, and the military's education benefits were part of the resources that we used to make that project happen. So with my background as a financial educator and a financial coach, I don't like to use the word planner because I don't give advice, I give information. But it became really important to me that I learn what benefits are available to our military families and how to integrate them into a larger financial plan. So I started sharing this with other people, and here we are. So I'm going to go right into the slide deck. As Sierra said, we will have some room for questions afterwards, but not an unlimited amount of time. So please, if we don't get to them, we will get them to them in Blue Star Families, in the neighborhood, or anywhere. You know, we will be here for you. We're not going to give you this webinar and just disappear. So I'm going to start sharing my slide deck, which of course doesn't look the way I expect it to, but we're going to make that happen. Okay, y'all let me know if you cannot see this.
Looks good, Kate.
Okay, great. So as we said, the topic here is college funding for military families. The underlying concept is that the most effective college funding plans take into consideration the entire family's resources and their educational goals. One of the number one mistakes I see military families make when they're thinking about their college financial plans is they think about goals and resources as individual efforts. So a family might come to me and say, you know what, my first child is really interested in going to med school. My second child wants to work for a professional sporting team, and we've got 18 months of GI Bill benefits for each kid, and we've got a little bit of money in 529s. And I say, okay, let's step back and let's make this picture bigger. Who else is in the family? Does a parent want to go to college and get some more education? What are these resources that you've just mentioned to me? What other resources do you have? And how could we best distribute them to the whole family? So I'm going to talk about this a little bit I do have to preface this by saying that there is literally no way I can teach you everything in this amount of time. So there's going to be more that needs to be learned. I'm hoping to point you in the right direction for that information. I will give a little plug for my book, which gives some more details in it. So the first concept I want you to understand is that some college funding resources are tied to the individual student, and some of them are available to be reallocated within the family. So for example, a grant or scholarship is probably tied to the student. If your oldest child gets a scholarship to State University, you probably can't ask the State University, hey, do you think you could give that to her brother? Not really going to happen. Other things that are very much tied to the student include student loans. Many state programs like Florida Bright Futures, Texas Hazelwood, while it is tied to the veteran, right, the benefits are per student. Work study awards, federal grants, and dependents educational assistance benefits from the VA. On the flip side, we can look at some resources as being available to the whole family, and you can move them around as it works in as part of your plan. For example, money in 529 plans, even if it has someone's name attached to it, can be moved to a different beneficiary if that's what works out best for your family's big picture. Post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, as long as that person has some benefits transferred to them, they can be reallocated amongst the eligible beneficiaries, even after you've left the military service. You can't add new beneficiaries after military service, but you can reallocate. Savings that you might have that isn't like in a special plan, not like a 529 plan. Cash flow, contributions from extended family. Sometimes that doesn't work out so well. Sometimes grandmom and granddad really have an idea. Hey, we're going to give $1,000 a year to each child. But maybe you could say to them, hey, what would work best for our family situation is if you gave $2,000 to this kid and none to this kid. And we'll get into why that might be more fair than it sounds. And then depending on who's doing the working, right? Maybe income from working is how that works out. So it's important to understand what types of things are financial aid and how this plays into your family's big picture. We all kind of hope that our kid is going to get a really big financial aid package, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it's likely going to come in the form of a bunch of different things added together. So they may get some sort of merit aid from the school. Merit aid is aid that is based on some sort of accomplishment. It might be academic, it might be artistic, it might be athletic, or some specific criteria that they meet. The other thing is need-based aid. This is typically determined at the school level. What do they think your family's need is, and what is their willingness to contribute to make college possible for your student? Outside scholarships may or may not be an important part of the package. Every situation is different. There are a lot of scholarships out there that are specific to military children. So this is a little bit of an advantage that our military kids have, is that they have some scholarships they can apply to that not everyone else can, but they are not guaranteed. Another important thing to know about outside scholarships is disproportionately they apply to your freshman year. So if you're building out a 4-year financial plan, which you should be, you can't assume, unless it's a scholarship that you know is renewable every year, you can't assume that your student is going to get that same level of financial aid the first year. I would estimate that my own personal students and my clients who do get outside scholarships, they get about $4 their freshman year for every dollar they get in subsequent years. And that's not based upon a scientific study, that's anecdotal data, but that gives you an idea about how to think, hey, if my kid got $4,000 in outside scholarships as a freshman, maybe we should only be planning for about $1,000 in subsequent years, if even that, depending on the nature of those scholarships. Then, of course, there is federal aid. That includes things like student loans, federal student loans, which kind of fall into the federal aid student loan category, but also Pell Grant and other specific federal programs that are very frequently for quite low income families. There are some military families that will be eligible for these programs, but the vast majority of people, by the time they've served long enough to have kids in college, may not be eligible. Now, if it's a spouse or a service member going to school, federal aid may absolutely be part of that equation. We did mention briefly loans, but it's important to remember that while they are considered financial aid, they have to be repaid, right? And then work study. Work study is technically a federal program that the school determines if a student is eligible based upon some level of need. The important thing to know about work study is how it works at every school is really different. Some schools, there are no jobs available on campus that aren't work study jobs. Other schools, exactly the opposite is true, that there are no work study jobs available at all. So if you're counting on work study as part of your student's financial aid plan, you want to make sure you understand the climate at their school. The other thing to know about work study is that it doesn't come when the bill comes due. It gets paid just like a normal job. This can be a challenge for two reasons. First of all, if you're counting on work study perhaps to pay room and board, but room and board is due at the end of July or the beginning of August, and your student isn't going to get their first paycheck until the end of September, and they're not going to get all of their work study money until the end of the semester, that's a planning challenge. The other planning challenge with work study is the kids very reasonably feel like, you know what, I went to a job every day this week to earn this money, and I feel like I should be able to spend it. So sometimes work study is great pocket money, but sometimes it's not the best money to pay for actual tuition, room, board, fees, those type of things. So in the family resources section, I talked about different types of college savings. There are really three main categories. There are 529 plans. They can either be 529 savings plans, which many of you have heard of. They're typically tied to a state, although there are some private 529 plans that can be used, throughout the country. There are also something called Coverdale Educational Savings Accounts. They came before 529 plans, and they have kind of gone out of favor because you can't put as much money into them as you can 529 plans, but they may be a good choice for your family. And then, of course, there's just personal savings. Our family, for a variety of reasons, didn't really utilize 529 plans as much as maybe we should have. But we had money in just a dedicated savings account that was mentally earmarked to pay for college. Now, if you've got young children and you're watching this, know that even a little bit adds up. If you put $100 a month in an account for 18 years in a tax advantage plan, even if you only earn 5% on that money, you're going to have about $35,000 for college, which is a great start. But don't think it's too late to start on the flip side, right? If you have a 16-year-old, even putting a little money aside is going to be a really big advantage for you. So, a question I hear from military families are, do I need other financial resources? Do I need savings if I have the post 9/11 GI Bill? And the answer is almost definitely yes. The only people for whom I do not see more money being helpful is someone who neither parents want to go to school. Right? They're both happy with their educational goals, that they've met what they want to do. There's a single child who wants to go to a low cost school and has no interest in grad school. In that case, maybe the post 9/11 GI Bill is totally plenty to fulfill your family's needs. I should probably throw out there, if this is a dual military couple, right, and they've got two GI Bills and two kids, so right, you could just double that math. So then the next question people ask me is, well, what do we do with 529 money if we don't use it? Lots of options out there. There is this misconception that if you put money in a 529 and you don't end up using it for school, that somehow it's just going to get, like, I want to say wasted, but that the penalties and the tax hit are going to be so big that it makes it completely a worthless endeavor and you've, cost yourself money. That is almost never true. You can roll it into a Roth IRA. There's rules and limits, but that's a great new option. You could transfer it to another sibling. You could take a relatively small penalty and just cash it out. You could give it to an eligible relative. You could give it to a cousin. You could transfer it back to a parent. You could go to cheese making school. That was my goal for a really long time. It might still be one of my goals. You could save it for your grandkids. Like, isn't that crazy that you're talking about putting your kid through college and you're thinking, well, if we have this extra money left over, we'll just keep it in this tax advantaged account to benefit the next generation for our family. So this is a very important place in the process to point out that while post 9/11 GI Bill benefit transferability is not part of this webinar, because could be a whole webinar in itself, they must be transferred while the service member is still serving, and it incurs a 4-year service obligation. So if any of you are watching this webinar and you are counting on the post 9/11 GI Bill to put a spouse or kids through college, and that those benefits have not been transferred, let's go ahead and get those transferred as soon as possible. I would say let's transfer them right now. However, we can't necessarily transfer them right now, and I'll tell you why. Oh no, what have I done? There we go. Because there is a 4-year service obligation that is required to transfer post 9/11 GI Bills, you need to have 4 years of service left. So for those of you who do not have an indefinite enlistment or an indefinite commission, you may need to align the transfer of your post 9/11 GI Bill benefits with a re-enlistment or an extension of your enlistment. So this may require a little planning on your family's part to know, hey, I'm going to re-enlist in December for 4 more years, and I'm going to go in that day and I'm going to transfer my post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. In my experience, every branch maybe handles this a little bit differently. So you might want to talk to whoever handles your enlistment in order to ask them, what do I need to do to align these two activities? Or maybe talk to your education office if you feel like you're not getting the answers that you need. But this is super important. And something to understand is that there is only one 4-year service obligation. So if by some chance you're watching this and you don't even have kids yet, you can transfer benefits to a spouse and that starts that 4-year clock. And then when someday maybe you do have children, you can add children as long as you're still serving without incurring another 4-year service obligation. So this is an important planning point for our much younger service members. So if you're in a position, maybe you have troops that are underneath you, or you work in some sort of family support position, this is something you can share with the people you work with to help improve their ability to possibly use these post 9/11 GI Bill benefits for their family. So just to make sure you have a quick idea of how the post 9/11 GI Bill works, everyone who has earned the post 9/11 GI Bill has earned 36 months of benefits. Now it gets a little confusing because sometimes you'll hear about people who have less than 100% eligibility. Basically, that means they haven't served 3 whole years of qualifying service yet. This is typically reserve component members, so our reservists and our National Guardsmen, who don't have 3 years of days that count towards their post 9/11 GI Bill. But the percentage of eligibility doesn't impact how many months they have. It impacts how much benefit they have each month, if that makes sense. So everyone who's earned the post 9/11 GI Bill has 36 months of benefits. And they get 36 months of 3 main parts. One of them is tuition. How much varies based on the school. It is up to an annual limit, changes each year. It's about $29,000 for this school year, 2025, 2026 school year. This is money that gets paid directly to the school when you go through the appropriate process towards your tuition. They'll only pay how much tuition is. They're not going to pay the whole $29,000 if tuition is $11,000. But they will pay up to that limit or up to the full amount of tuition and fees. The next really big benefit for a lot of families is a monthly housing allowance, and that is based on the school's location. So let's say your child goes to school in New York City, they're going to have a very different housing allowance than a student who maybe goes to school in, what school am I thinking of? Stetson in DeLand, Florida, right? Has a much lower housing allowance than New York City. So this is an important thing to think about. And also a books allowance, which is paid up to $1,000 a year. It's about $41.67 a credit hour. They pay out however much in the fall semester based upon the credit hours, and then they'll pay the remaining up to $1,000 in any subsequent semesters. One of the reasons that we talk about these three parts of it, first of all, is just so you understand how it works. But second of all, so that you understand the variables that are going to go into your family's financial plan. This allowance isn't a super big variable. If you've got two kids in school, they're both going to school full time, the books allowance is going to even out. But the tuition payment to the school and the monthly housing allowance may be very different benefits from school to school. And this is a super important planning tool as part of your big picture. So it's also important to throw out here that one of the other factors to consider is that the post 9/11 GI Bill may have an expiration date depending on who's using it and when the veteran left the military. Kids run out of benefits at age 26. So if you were looking at a student who has a long educational path, maybe they're going to med school, and you're thinking, oh, strategically, we should save these benefits for the end of med school because that's going to be really expensive. You want to make sure you're not running into this expiration date. The VA uses a term called delimiting date. So age 26, kids aren't eligible to use these benefits anymore. For spouses and veterans, it depends on when the veteran left the military. So if they left the military before 1 January 2013, their benefits expire 15 years after leaving the military. If you or someone you work with is in this situation, you can see we're pretty rapidly coming up on 15 years after 1 January 2013. So if you or someone you know is in this group and they haven't started using their benefits yet, this is probably a really good time to start making a plan to get those benefits used before they expire. However, if the veteran left the military on or after 1 January 2013, those benefits do not expire. You'll sometimes hear people talk about the Forever GI Bill, and was just the name of the bill that made this non-expiration happen. Okay, a big program that you guys need to know about is the Yellow Ribbon Program. You have probably heard this talked about. You have probably thought, there are some things about this I don't understand. And that's perfectly normal because it takes a little while to get your head around this one. So the really key thing you need to know about yellow ribbon benefits is they are only used when GI Bill benefits are being used. I think of them as a motorcycle and a sidecar. If the motorcycle is not driving down the road, the sidecar is not driving down the road. So sometimes I'll hear family members say to me, we're going to use the GI Bill benefits first, and then we're going to use our yellow ribbon benefits. And while there is a situation in which it may look that way on paper, that's not how it works at all. If you are receiving yellow ribbon benefits, you are burning GI Bill benefits eligibility to do it. And if you don't have any GI Bill eligibility, you're not eligible to use the yellow ribbon program. Now, I will throw out there that it is totally possible that there is some school in this country that has like an extra program that they also call yellow ribbon. I think maybe they're not doing that. Everybody would have figured out that that's a bad idea by now, but the federal Yellow Ribbon program is absolutely tied to the use of GI Bill benefits. The Yellow Ribbon program is an additional funding program that's a collaboration between the individual school and the VA. The schools must opt into this program. They sign an agreement with the VA and they say, listen, our tuition and fees are more than the GI Bill pays. So we're willing to kick in a little bit to fill in that gap. And then the VA will match the amount that the school has kicked in. So I'm going to give you a very simple example. Let's say GI Bill benefits this year about $29,000 a year. Let's say tuition is $30,000 a year. So there's a $1,000 gap for the military family to fill in for that student each year. And the school says, we'll pitch in $500. And the VA says, we'll match that $500. So collectively, the two sources fill in that $1,000 gap, leaving no out-of-pocket tuition and fees cost to the family. Sometimes we're talking about much bigger numbers here, right? One of my kids went to a school that tuition is probably, we're going to use $69,000 this year because it's a nice round number to go with that $29,000 GI Bill. It's probably not exactly that, but close enough. Tuition is $69,000. The GI Bill pays $29,000, leaving the family with a $40,000 gap to cover that tuition each year, right? Not $40,000 for 4 years, but $40,000 per year. This particular school offers to pay half of that. And then the VA pays the other half. So the school pitches in $20,000 and the VA pitches in another $20,000 so that the military families who are using the GI Bill and the Yellow Ribbon program are still not paying any tuition costs out of pocket, even though it's a $69,000 a year school. Now, it's super important to understand that not every school needs to participate at that full level. They don't need to agree to pay half of the difference between full tuition and what the GI Bill will pay. They could pay a lower number. They're totally allowed to do that, right? This is their money they're giving up. So some schools may offer $5,000 a year. Maybe they'll offer $10,000 a year. The VA will still match that amount, but it may still leave a family with a gap. So in my same example of a school with $69,000 a year tuition, the VA pays $29,000 a year for post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. So there's this $40,000 gap. Maybe the school agrees to contribute $10,000 a year. And then the VA contributes $10,000 a year. So now that $40,000 gap is only $20,000, but that's still $20,000 a year that family needs to pay for that student to go to school, or they need to find other funding resources, right? May not come out of their pocket, as we've discussed. The other thing to know is that not every school offers these benefits to every VA student. So they may have a limited number of slots at each school. Some schools only offer Yellow Ribbon benefits to 10 students. Maybe they offer it to 30 students. You can find this information on the VA comparison tool website, which is a great tool to look at schools, but always verify what you read there with the school itself. Every school has somebody called a school certifying official who is the liaison between the school and the VA. And they should be the experts in your school's veteran policies, and in particular, how the Yellow Ribbon program works at their school. Sometimes the VA tools may be a little outdated. Perhaps the school didn't send updated information in time, whatever the situation may be. For example, I recently called a school for a client and I said, I want to verify that you offer $5,000 a year of Yellow Ribbon benefits. So matched $5,000, $10,000 total payment in Yellow Ribbon payments. And they said, oh no, we've raised it this year to $8,000 a year. So once that gets matched, this is a $6,000 difference, which for that family may be the difference between that school being affordable and being unaffordable. So you want to verify that any information you get is accurate. I always recommend you do that in email so you've got some proof of what you were told, because you know sometimes how these communications go. Thing about these limited number of slots, first of all, is there's a little trick to know whether or not your kid is likely to get one, is also at the VA website, you can see how many students use VA benefits at that school each year. This is not fail-safe, but you can look and see, hey, they award 30 yellow ribbon slots and they only have 16 VA benefits, 16 students using GI Bill benefits last year. Well, the likelihood of your student getting a yellow ribbon slot at that school is pretty high. Also, again, ask your school certifying official, hey, do all of your slots fill up? If they say yes, you want to find out, how do these get awarded? What is the process? But an important thing to know is that the process per the VA's guidelines has to be first come, first serve. So your kid going in and being really sweet to the school certifying official is a lovely thing to do, but it is not going to make the school certifying official partial to giving them those VA benefits, which is on purpose, right? We want this to be an equitable process for everybody. So the Yellow Ribbon Program can make a tremendous difference in your family's out-of-pocket costs for college, but it is also a super duper important part of your planning strategy. Because if you have a student who's going to go to a school that offers huge yellow ribbon benefits, and you have another student who's going to go to a school that doesn't offer any yellow ribbon benefits at all, well, the GI Bill is going to get you more bang for your buck at the school with huge yellow ribbon benefits. So it's part of your planning strategy. So another tool that you may have available to you is Chapter 35, also called Survivors Independence Educational Assistance. This is another VA education program that applies to the survivors of active duty death or also the family members of 100% permanently and totally disabled veterans. It is a flat monthly rate. It is based upon the program type. You can see last year it was about $1,500 a month. So very different level of benefit, right? But what's important to know about DEA is many people have access to both benefits. They may have the post 9/11 GI Bill and they may also have access to DEA, but they can't use two VA benefits at the same time. And there is a limit on the total number of VA benefits they can use over the course of their academic career. So once again, this gets into your strategy. Maybe, for example, you have a student who's got both post 9/11 GI Bill and DEA. But their post 9/11 GI Bill benefit, but they've got siblings, right? So the post 9/11 GI Bill needs to get split up however's best for the family. They go to a very inexpensive school and they don't intend to pursue graduate education. You know, that's not part of the plan today. So maybe it makes more sense for them to use DEA to offset their cost of education, to allow a sibling to use more of the post 9/11 GI Bill benefits at a more expensive educational institution. So here we're just thinking about how can we take these Lego blocks and put them together in a different order to build a different building, right? So obviously not everyone thankfully has access to this, but many, I'm surprised at how many people I work with who do. Just like anything, DEA has expiration dates. I actually don't want you to get hung up on the dates that are on this screen because it's kind of complicated. Go to if you are have DEA as one of your resources, go to the VA website, get an actual ruling on your specific situation, because there are some nuances of this one. So another planning factor that you need to consider when you're figuring out how to pay for college for your unit is how VA benefits impact in-state tuition. So the short answer is that there is a rule that says that if someone is using any VA educational benefits, the school cannot consider their state of residency as part of the determination of being an in-state student. Which is convoluted, but it's convoluted on purpose. The intent was that we didn't want military kids to be disadvantaged because maybe their parent just retired or they hadn't lived somewhere long enough to get in-state tuition, or maybe their parent just PCSed from somewhere and so they weren't eligible for in-state tuition, but that really kind of was their home. Maybe that's where they went to high school. So they wrote it this very specific way. Now, in translation, what this means is that most schools will just give you in-state tuition if you're using VA benefits. However, there are a few things they can ask from you. They can ask you to show maybe a driver's license or voter registration or other intent to be a resident of that state. Not a lot of schools do that today, but there are schools that do. So you need to know, are we going to be eligible for in-state tuition because we're using VA benefits, or is there something else we need to do to qualify for this loophole? It's not a loophole, but it is kind of a loophole of the law. And then what's super powerful is that the law only says that you are eligible for this qualification while you're using VA benefits. But many schools are more generous than this, and they may allow you to keep that in-state tuition as long as you remain enrolled in a program. So for example, I have not checked this morning, but as of last time I looked at Penn State, if you use one semester of VA education benefits, you get in-state tuition for the rest of your time at Penn State, provided you don't drop out, right? You don't take a year off. So for a family that is trying to figure out how to allocate their VA benefits between a bunch of kids, sometimes the concept of using a few months at one school to get that in-state tuition can be super powerful financially, even if that isn't this place that makes the most sense to use all of the benefits. For example, I have a friend who had two children. One went to Notre Dame, one went to Penn State. And what made the most sense for their family was to use just one semester of benefits at Penn State and then use all the rest of the benefits at Notre Dame, because that's what made the most financial sense for their family. So I'm trying to give you an idea, like, how do you think outside of the box when you're using all of these benefits? I'm also going to throw a little pop in here. This is a new slide about something called the Rudisill decision. This was a Supreme Court case that says that certain veterans who bought into the Montgomery GI Bill and also earned the post 9/11 GI Bill may now be eligible for additional VA education benefits. Under the old rules, as soon as you started using post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, you were giving up any post Montgomery GI Bill benefits that you had bought into. Supreme Court said no, under certain circumstances, you actually have eligibility for both. The VA is doing a really good job of getting this information out to the people who are eligible, but there's a lot of people that were impacted. So if you think that your service member might have fallen into this situation, you can go to the VA website and request that they review your service member's education benefits and see if they may get a little more education benefits out as a result of this decision. Now, it's important to understand that if the service member has already used or allocated 36 months of education benefits to the post 9/11 GI Bill, so either use them themselves or transfer them to a family member, any additional benefits they get, which would be up to 12 months, will only be Montgomery GI Bill benefits, and those aren't eligible to be transferred. So if you have a service member who falls under this Supreme Court decision, it's not going to give you extra benefits for your kids. Probably. Now, if they didn't get 36 months of the post 9/11 GI Bill because they'd already used some of their Montgomery GI Bill, they may be allocated some post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. that can be transferred. Everybody's situation on this one's going to be a little bit different. It's a little confusing, isn't it? We've talked about scholarships. There are some search tools that you can use. The Fisher House Foundation one is really good, and it's actually been getting better. They revamped it at some point. I don't know. I want to say recently, it's probably been a few years, so that it's a little bit more tailored. I offer them at my website. Your high school counseling center often knows about those hyper local scholarships. A little pro tip is if your high school counseling center doesn't do a great job of compiling these and sharing them with your community, go to the website of the next high school over, or two high schools over. One of the high schools in your area keeps a good database of the local area scholarships. There are also online things called like FAFSA or Big Future, or just put in the internet best scholarship search today or whatever, because these resources do change over time. So I've talked a little bit about all of the different kinds of resources that you might have to pay for college. But then your next question might be, well, how do I put this all together? Well, first of all, you need to ask yourself some questions. First of all, who wants an education? And very importantly, don't forget that parents' education can also be a very valuable part of a financial plan. For example, if you're thinking, I don't want to use my GI Bill benefits, I want to save them for my kid, but you getting a master's degree increases your income by $30,000 a year for the next 10 years, and then for the rest of your working career, that might be a better use of your education benefits, to go ahead and increase your income now versus saving these benefits for some point in the future. Not true for every situation, but definitely true for a lot of situations. Next questions you want to ask yourself is anybody in my family more or less likely to get married? This is where the crystal ball part of this comes in, which can be a little frustrating because we all want to feel like we made the best decisions that we could. But we have to make the best decisions that we can with the information we have available at the time. You can't control beyond that, right? Information changes into the future. This is easier if you have a bunch of kids all close together. I had 4 kids in 4.5 years, so I had a better idea, right? But if your children are maybe a little bit further apart, or you're trying to decide between using benefits for a parent now or a student later, a little bit harder, but something to consider. There is also this concept called displacement. So displacement means, how does different financial aid work together? And I could do a whole webinar on this, but basically it is asking, will using one form of financial aid knock another form of financial aid out of the equation? And this is very important when it comes to the post 9/11 GI Bill, because what happens very frequently is that a school may offer aid, and then when you tell them you're going to use the post 9/11 GI Bill, they withdraw the aid that they've offered you. And let me tell you why that happens. They're not just being jerks. The post 9/11 GI Bill is always the last payer of tuition. So let's say your student goes to a school that's exactly $29,000 for tuition. And you're thinking, okay, the GI Bill is going to pay $29,000. Great, we don't have any tuition cost. And then they get a $5,000 merit scholarship. And you think, wow, this is great. We can use that $5,000 to pay for room and board. Like now we've got this $5,000 excess, but their merit scholarship is a tuition only scholarship. So if the school contributes $5,000 towards tuition, well, now the remaining tuition bill is only $24,000, and the VA is only going to pay $24,000. They're not going to pay the $29,000 you were anticipating. So the net result is still that your cost is exactly the same, but the school has now absorbed $5,000 that the VA would have paid if they hadn't done that. So in this example, the school will almost definitely pull back that $5,000, because why would they want to give in their money when they know the VA is going to pay it anyway, right? There are some solutions to this problem. Not every award is tied to tuition. So maybe it's a type of aid that can be transferred to room and board, and that would totally help you out, right? The VA still pays their $29,000. You can use that $5,000 towards room and board or other expenses. Maybe you can ask them to redesignate that scholarship. Hey, I know I got a $5,000 tuition scholarship. Is there any way to recode that to be available for room and board? The other thing you can do is maybe strategically decide if you don't have enough GI Bill benefits, when are you going to use them? I talked about how frequently freshmen get more scholarships. So let's say you have a student who you've decided as part of your family plan is only going to use 18 months of GI Bill benefits. And you were like, well, we're just going to use it freshman year till we get ourselves settled. But then they get a $10,000 scholarship that they're only going to get freshman year. Well, now you start thinking, let's not use the GI Bill this year. Let's use some other resources to pay for this year. And let's bump the GI Bill down to a year that they're not going to get that $10,000 scholarship. So there's different ways you can deal with the displacement situation, but you have to understand it to build it into your plan. We also mentioned earlier how tuition and monthly housing allowance factor into this. If you have two kids, one of the examples in my book is a kid who's going to school in New York and a kid who's going to school in South Florida. And in that example, just by changing the way we use the GI Bill, we could save the family about $100,000 because tuition and housing are so much higher in New York than they are in South Florida. In-state tuition, we talked about it. We want to know what that school is going to do once you don't use VA benefits anymore, or if you never use them at all. Some schools will just give you in-state tuition if you're a military kid. Not a lot of them, but some will. Or maybe your student is eligible for in-state tuition under one of the other rules, like their parent was stationed there, or it's your state of legal residence, or some other qualification that you don't even have to use VA benefits to get in-state tuition. Lastly, and not a consideration for a ton of people, but are you eligible for any federal tax credits based upon education expenses? And is that going to change while any of your students are in school? And again, we could do a whole nother webinar on that one. More questions you need to ask yourself. It's a lot of questions. Do you foresee a change in income? We had all 4 kids in college when my husband retired. So that was a change in income for us that we had to build into our plan. What is your family's philosophy on paying for education? Do you believe that kids should be doing this themselves and you're just helping out? Do you believe that student loans are horrible, or are you willing to use them? Do you have the idea that you're going to help get kids through undergrad, but graduate school is on their own, right? Everybody approaches educational funding from different personal beliefs. It's also important to understand the types of schools. VA education benefits can be used for lots of different types of education, not just traditional four-year colleges. They can go to tech school. You can get your you can pay for your MCAT tests. You can use it to get different types of licenses. We've talked about how the yellow ribbon program will vary dramatically. We talked about stacking, and we talked about, is anybody going to go to grad school? Because it's often more expensive and very frequently there's less aid available for graduate school students. And particularly with some of the recent changes in student loans, graduate school funding is going to get more difficult going into the future. And so that's a key factor, right? If anybody in your family thinks they're going to go to grad school. I promise we are wrapping up here because this has been a lot of information. So how do you maximize the value of your GI Bill and your other educational benefits? Well, some things you want to look at when you build out your plan. Use the GI Bill for your higher cost tuition. Use the GI Bill at schools with higher monthly housing allowance. Use GI Bill benefits based upon course days, not course load. And what I mean by that is sometimes you can get a lot of bang for your buck by using GI Bill benefits are charged by the day. So that's something I don't think I've shared yet in this. So let's say your student has 18 months of benefits that they can use to pay for school. but they go to a summer school program that's only, I don't know, 5 weeks long. They're only going to get charged those 5 weeks of benefits for what's considered a whole semester versus a spring or fall semester is typically 12, 13, 14 weeks. So you want to think about how many days are you spending of benefits based upon how many credits are you earning out of those benefits. Sometimes this can be really impactful. For example, students can frequently get 3 credit hours in a week during maybe a January or a May semester, whereas they might only get 12 or 15 credit hours out of 12 or 14 weeks during a regular semester. So you're spending fewer days to get more credits. Something to consider. We talked about using the GI Bill to buy in-state tuition. It's not really buying it, but that's how I think of it. And as I said, to use the GI Bill for more expensive semesters or years. Some schools have different reasons that school might be more expensive some year. Maybe your kid is in a program that has a lot of lab fees that are eligible for GI Bill reimbursement based upon the situation. And you know that one semester they're going to have, $2,000 in lab fees. Well, maybe that's the semester you want to use the GI Bill if you don't have enough to pay for everything. In addition to graduate school being more expensive, some schools charge a premium for upper level courses. And in that case, it may make sense to use the GI Bill for those semesters that you're taking more upper level courses. So many variables to consider when you're building out your family's plan. Okay, so this was actually the end of the formal part of this presentation because I hope we've left a ton of time for questions. How are we doing, Sierra?
We have about 8 minutes left. So,
Not as much as I hoped.
yeah, but that's okay. Thank you so much. This has been so informative. We have received quite a few questions, and I've tried to keep track of what you've answered along the way and what wasn't touched on. So I'd love to start with this first one from Gina regarding she seems to be seeing a lot of messages based on how to lower your expected family contribution based on the FAFSA. And so she's wondering if there's actual strategies for FAFSA that parents should know and prepare for.
So the quick answer to that is no. Generally, most of those strategies involve following the directions on the FAFSA. I've been seeing a lot of those too, so you're not alone. And they kind of make my head want to pop off because most of them do involve following directions. Now, could you get some little nuances from there? Maybe. Like, for example, let's say you own a rental home at your last duty station and it's an investment property, you need to report it on your FAFSA. And you need to report a value of that rental home on there. Well, maybe you don't need to report like that dream value that you're hoping you're going to get if you ever put it on the market. This is not legal advice, but the advice that was given to me was like, what is the price that you would need to price it at to sell it in 2 weeks?
Mm.
So is that a strategy? Yes, it's a strategy. Is it like a crazy trick? No, it's not really a crazy trick. Good question.
Great, thank you. From Vicky Lynn, she asked, how does the GI Bill work for the National Guard and the 4-year requirement if transferred?
Yes. So the 4-year requirement is actually not as onerous as it seems because they don't count those qualifying days the same way. So typically the National Guard, as long as you've got eligible years of service, do not have a problem meeting that eligibility requirement. The big difference for the National Guard, as I mentioned, is that they may not earn 100% eligibility because there's a chart that you can see either at the VA or at my website, but it talks about how many days of qualifying service you need to have for each level of the GI Bill. And you need to have 3 years of qualifying days. Now, some National Guardsmen who have, been deployed many times absolutely meet that threshold. But a lot of National Guardsmen I work with don't have 100% eligibility. They still get 36 months, but they get a prorated portion of what would have been paid.
Okay. Thanks so much, Kate. How about for universities in Europe? Um, can they pay, I guess, can the GI Bill pay for that? Is
Yes.
the 29,000 the total for both living and school fees or question mark from Sue?
Yeah. Good question. So the $29,000 is the tuition part only. And that limit is the same regardless of where the school is located. But again, it's the cost of the actual cost or $29,000, whichever one's higher. And then the housing allowance is separate. Now, overseas, the housing allowance is calculated a little bit differently. Unlike in America, in the United States, where it's based upon the zip code of the school that you're attending, if you are going in person. Overseas, it's a flat rate. So the housing allowance is a flat rate regardless of where you go to school overseas. If you live in Shanghai or if you live, in a remote part of Italy, you're still getting the same housing allowance overseas. I hope
Okay,
that answered the question.
that's really useful to know. I was not even aware of that. Um, from Louise, she is asking, it's overwhelming, I guess, because she did not grow up in the USA. And so she's wondering if there's a list of all of the options or contacts to determine what the right path is. Do you have that on your website, Kate?
Even know exactly what that would be like, right? My website would be a good place to start. The VA website is a great place to start. Um, I don't really want to plug my
Yeah.
book, but go read the book. And maybe that will give you a foundation. That's the goal of the book. It's not going to answer every question that someone has, but it is going to give them the foundational knowledge that they need to go to the schools, look at their family situation, look at the VA website, and it teaches you how to gather that information.
Yeah, and we have shared both of those links within the chat. If you weren't able to grab them, I will reshare them in the neighborhood afterward. So just be on the lookout for resources. Let's see. Colleen is asking, can students stay on as 100% disability pay as a dependent while using Chapter 33 and or Chapter 35? Are you?
I know the answer to this question and it is floating around in my head somewhere. Um, I'd like to verify that one actually before I answer it because I do not want to say something that is inaccurate.
Okay, so we will follow up on this within the
Please.
neighborhood, Colleen. Um, Gina's asking if there's time. Her spouse commissioned in 2000, and she would love to know how to get clarification on whether her spouse might fall under that Russell decision. Should he call
Yes.
the VA?
So if you go to the VA, there's a tool called Ask VA and you can send in a request to say, hey, does this apply to me? I
Okay,
feel
great.
like they're doing a really good job considering the size of the job that they're doing.
Definitely, definitely. Um, From the Torres family, would you ask a school directly if they will offer in-state tuition no matter how many semesters you can use the GI Bill?
Absolutely. Many schools listed on their website. I actually created a blog post that tried to compile the links to every state. Because this is not a private school issue, it's a state school issue. Because private schools don't have in-state and out-of-state tuition, right? So applies to state schools. I created a list at my website. I don't want to say it's not comprehensive because I did check with every state, but I didn't get an answer from every state. So in that regard, it may not have the answer to your question, but if I was able to find a written source, it is included in that blog post.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kate. And then Jennifer was curious, where would you suggest she look for information on how to use 1 month of eligibility at a time in order to use the benefit for multiple children?
Okay. So I will tell you that schools are going to be reluctant to let you use 1 month at a time, just out of the gate. If they see that there's more. Now, it gets a little tricky because if your kid only has 1 month, they can't force you to transfer benefits, right? So how every school is going to do this, you're really going to want to sit down and build out a strategy. And so I would recommend either meeting with an expert that specializes in this, or maybe joining one of the Facebook groups. There are many Facebook groups out there that deal with either using VA benefits, using GI Bill benefits, or just generally paying for college for military kids. I don't want to recommend them here, but y'all know how to use search. And so somebody in there will be able to give you some specific advice if you're not in a position that you want to work with someone individually. But the ability to use just 1 month at a time is really going to vary based on the school.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kate. I really appreciate you being here, sharing your knowledge and all of the work that you do to support our military and veteran families. Um, Everybody, thank you for showing up today. Again, we will share the recording and the resources probably sometime early next week. But if there's anything you need, please feel free to email me and we will be in touch soon. Have a great day, Kate. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.